Welcome to Wicked Tales Unfold, where fear takes form and the unknown becomes reality. But before we start, if you want more amazing stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, if possible, share this video with your friends. Now, without wasting any more time, let's begin with the story. The phantom passenger. The night was still as the cab rolled down the empty streets of downtown. Most people had turned in for the night, leaving only the scattered glow of street lamps to illuminate the cracked pavement. Sam, a seasoned cab driver, leaned against the worn leather seat, the hum of the engine the only sound accompanying him on this quiet shift. He had just finished his last fare when his phone pinged with a request for a ride. As he accepted, he glanced at the dispatch screen. It was one of those drop-off locations deep in the industrial area, a place where shadows stretched long and flickered sporadically as if haunted by unspeakable secrets. "Here we go," Sam muttered, his curiosity piqued even if he felt a prickling unease. Within minutes, he pulled up under a flickering neon sign that read, "Wrecks and Repairs." The surroundings were desolate, a stretch of broken glass and rusted machinery. A figure stepped out from the darkness, slipping into the backseat of the cab. Sam glanced at the rearview mirror and saw a young woman, her features obscured by the shadows, her straight black hair hanging like a curtain around her face. "Where to?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road. "Just drive," she replied, her voice soft but threaded with an edge of urgency. Sam fought the instinct to pry further. He put the car in motion, taking a left down a deserted alley. He could feel an unusual chill creeping into the cab, more than just the cool night air slipping through the slight cracks in the windows. He stole a glance into the rearview mirror, and that's when it started. At first, it was subtle. The way her reflection lingered a moment too long, the smile that wasn't quite right. But as they drove deeper into the night, the changes became more drastic. The eyes in the mirror appeared to swirl, the whites fading into a depthless abyss, as if they were staring into a void, warning him he was crossing into something unfathomable. "Are you all right?" Sam asked hesitantly, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked anxiously back at the woman, but she remained still, her gaze fixed forward. "Just don't stop," she urged, her voice now a low rasp. With each passing block, the woman's reflection morphed further. Her skin grew pallid, features contorting in a grotesque parade of emotions, from fear to rage, and then something he couldn't quite name. It was as if the reflection was peeling away layers of her identity, unveiling raw, pulsating fragments of something dark. He swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. "Hey, I think you need to drive," she screamed, and this time her voice was laced with desperation, a plea that silenced his hesitation. He pressed on, his eyes darting back to the mirror. Behind her, shadows in the reflection began to twist and writhe, stretching towards him as though reaching through the glass. He could feel his breath quicken, a primal instinct urging him to flee. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath. The woman's reflection twisted into despair, her mouth wide open in a silent scream. Her face grew gaunt, a near translucent figure as if every ounce of color and light was being stripped away 1 mile at a time. Sam fought against the icy panic creeping up his spine. "What's happening?" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. "Keep going. You have to keep me with you," she cried, desperation turning to a pleading wail. The headlights caught the outline of a dilapidated warehouse ahead, a glaring beacon of uncertainty that beckoned both dread and curiosity. With each rev of the engine, she seemed to fade more, a part of her escaping back into the shadows. Sam flicked the turn signal and turned toward the warehouse, the tires crunching on the gravel. The moment the cab stopped, he turned sharply to the rearview mirror, ready to face whatever fate awaited him. But the backseat was empty now, and in her place was only the cold void of night pressing against the cab windows. I'm here," he shouted, panic threatening to overwhelm him. But all that remained was silence, still and unyielding. The reflection in the mirror stared back at him, but it wasn't the shadowy girl anymore. Instead, it was his own terrified face, wide-eyed and trembling. The darkness behind him lingered, holding its breath, as if waiting for him to make the wrong choice. Sam's grip tightened, realization dawning like the slow light of a rising sun in that moment. He understood. She had been lost, trapped between worlds, and he was the one who had unwittingly become her final tether. With adrenaline surging, he slammed the car into gear and sped away from the warehouse, vowing never to return to that haunted place. The empty streets whizzed past him, but he could still feel her lingering in the shadows, her reflection forever haunting the corners of his mind. No matter how far he drove, he knew she would always be there, waiting somewhere in the night. Let's get to another story. The doll collector. When Sarah Thompson received the call about her grandmother's passing, she felt a mix of sorrow and nostalgia. Grandmother Claire had always been a whimsical soul, collector of the peculiar and privileged insider to stories that spun the fabric of Sarah's childhood. Her home was a treasure trove of memories, filled with curious trinkets that delighted and bewildered. But one thing stood out amongst the knickknacks: Claire's lifelong obsession with antique dolls. After the funeral, Sarah took a deep breath before stepping into her grandmother's home for the last time. Sunlight poured through the ornate windows, illuminating the living room, which was dominated by an old mahogany cabinet lined with dolls. Each doll was unique, adorned with intricate dresses, porcelain faces, and glassy eyes that seemed almost too lifelike. Sarah's heart raced with a mix of affection and unease. "Are you ready to carry on her legacy?" her mother asked, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. With a gentle nod, Sarah began sorting through the belongings, recounting playful afternoons spent dressmaking and storytelling with her grandmother. She felt a pang of wistfulness. Time had a way of diminishing those moments, but perhaps her grandmother's dolls could keep her memories alive. Taking the cabinet home, Sarah spent the next few days meticulously cleaning each doll and arranging them in her own home. The dolls went from the cramped cabinet to the rustic shelf in her living room, their porcelain faces gazing forward as if observing her every move. Often, Sarah would catch a glimpse of their shadows dancing along the walls, but she brushed it off as tricks of light. It wasn't long before peculiar things began to happen. While making coffee one morning, Sarah felt a cold breeze sweep through the kitchen. She glanced toward the living room and swore one of the dolls, a charming little girl with flaming red hair and a green dress, had shifted closer to the edge of the shelf. Could she have imagined it? Nah, she thought, they're just dolls. The next evening, Sarah sat on her couch with her favorite blanket, half watching a TV show and half lost in thought about her grandmother. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Each time she turned, those wide porcelain eyes seemed to follow her, undeterred by the flickering screen. "You're just a collection of old toys," she murmured to herself, trying to dispel the lingering apprehension. But sleep eluded her that night. She could have sworn she heard soft whispers, laughter almost, evoking memories of her grandmother's soothing voice as she wound tales of bravery and mystery. Was she imagining it, or were the dolls beckoning her to remember their histories? Days turned into weeks, and the disturbances morphed into something sinister. One morning, Sarah's heart raced as she found the little red-haired doll on the floor, even though she had positioned it perfectly in line with the others. "Okay, this is getting weird," she muttered aloud. Still, she rationalized it away, attributing it to being in a hurry or forgetfulness. But it only escalated. Items would be misplaced, the sound of soft laughter would tickle her ears, and at night, she would dream of the dolls dancing under swirling lights, their eyes sparkling mischievously. Then, one fateful evening, she felt compelled to confront the dolls. "What do you want from me?" she said, standing firm, the hairs on her neck prickling. The room fell silent, an unearthly stillness enveloping her. For a moment, it appeared as if the dolls were huddled together, conferring among themselves. Suddenly, she noticed something strange. A dark shadow passing between them, something alive, as if they were puppets with a hidden animus. A shadowy figure materialized, and she recognized the familiar silhouette, the shape of her beloved grandmother. Surrounded by the dolls she had cherished, Claire smiled softly, bathed in a gentle glow. "They are guardians, my dear. Watchers of my stories, and now they keep watch over you." Her voice, though faint, rang with warmth. "I entrusted them with the memories we created together. Why do they move? Why do I feel so uneasy? The love we shared must be honored, Sarah. The dolls reflect the essence of the stories within them. Embrace their memories, or they will have no place here." With that, Claire's figure slowly began to fade away, leaving behind an air of serene guidance. Sarah awoke to the whisper of dawn through her window, teeming with resolve. She understood now. The dolls were not here to frighten her. They were remnants of her grandmother's love meant to inspire creativity, to tell the stories that bridged generations. From that day on, Sarah devoted herself to weaving memories, crafting new narratives that encompassed both her life and her grandmother's. Each doll became a character in her tales, infused with love and laughter. And though they often seemed to shift in the shadows, Sarah no longer feared them. She welcomed their companionship, convinced that just beyond the realm of the ordinary lay a connection that thrived through stories, binding souls across time. In her heart, Sarah knew that every glance from the porcelain eyes was a reminder. The legacy of love never truly left one behind, it only transformed, eternally watching over her in laughter and light. Let's get to another story, The Haunting Melody. As the sun dipped behind the trees, cloaking the small town of Broadsfield in shades of violet and gray, a chill settled over the streets. In the heart of this quiet place, a dilapidated house stood, its once vibrant paint peeling and fading, much like the memories of those who once called it home. It had been abandoned for years, whispered about in hushed tones by the children who dared each other to approach its threshold. Corey, a struggling musician with dreams that stretched as wide as the sky, had always been drawn to places like this. Perhaps it was the promise of inspiration, or maybe the allure of ghosts that lingered beyond time, but as twilight approached, he found himself standing before the old house. With guitar slung over his back, Corey pushed open the creaking door, and it groaned in protest. Musty air embraced him, thick with dust and memories. The interior was a museum of neglect. Peeling wallpaper hung in tatters, and sunlight filtered through cracked windows, illuminating specks of dust that danced like faded spirits in the gloom. His heart thumped in his chest as he wandered through the barren rooms, his fingers brushing against the edges of furniture draped in ghostly sheets. Then, in a forgotten corner, he stumbled upon an unusual sight, a dusty piano, its keys yellowed with age, but surprisingly intact. Something about it seemed to pulsate with energy, pulling him closer. Corey sat at the piano, hesitantly lifting his fingers to the keys. He played a few random notes, a melody that felt forlorn, yet oddly inviting. Then he hesitated, a voice from the darkness urging him to explore deeper. His fingers danced over the keys, and without thinking, he played an eerie melody that seemed to unlock something hidden within the house. As the last note hung in the air, an unsettling stillness enveloped him. The shadows deepened, stretching unnaturally across the room. It was then that he heard it, a whisper, soft and tinged with sorrow. "Play it again." Turning his head, Corey faced nothing but silence. He shook off the unease and replayed the melody. As the notes echoed through the empty halls, the air grew colder, an unseen presence weaving itself between the notes. The whispers strengthened, words indistinct, but filled with an emotion that gnawed at his subconscious. Eager to grasp the source, he closed his eyes and immersed himself in the music. He sensed a shift around him, and when he opened his eyes, the once familiar room glimmered with a spectral glow. He blinked, his heart racing as ghostly figures began to materialize in the corners. People dressed in clothing from a bygone era, their expressions hauntingly sorrowful. Corey's breath caught in his throat. He played on, feeling the weight of their understanding. As the melody wrapped around the spirits, their whispers grew louder, interwoven with the notes. Words tumbled into his mind. Lost. Love, never found. Each phrase pressed upon his heart like a forgotten memory clawing its way to the surface. Visions flared into life, connecting him to moments lost in time. A couple dancing under soft candlelight in a long-gone parlor. A child laughing as autumn leaves swirled around him. A mother calling for her children as they played in the dying light. These were fragments of the house's history, echoes of lives intertwined with the very essence of the melody he played. Each night, Corey returned to the house, compelled to uncover the stories hidden within the haunting notes. With each session, he grew closer to the spirits, their identities unfolding like a journal revealed. Families torn apart by tragedy, a love that blossomed amidst the ashes of war, a promise made and forever broken. The townsfolk began to notice subtle changes in Corey. His music morphed, infused with a sense of depth and longing. He poured the haunting melodies into his songs, turning their sorrowful whispers into ballads that brought even the most stoic crowd to tears. It was as if the spirits had unlocked a part of his soul, channeling their pain into beauty. One moonlit night, sitting once again at the old piano, he played the melody with the intent of offering closure. The figures materialized, more defined than ever, surrounding him as if they were finally free to hear their stories sung aloud. As the final note faded into silence, their collective sigh resonated through the air, a release of pent-up sorrow. In the stillness that followed, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief.
The spirits smiled and faded into the shadows, leaving behind a shimmering aura of gratitude. The abandoned house, once a vessel of grief, transformed into a shrine of remembrance, filled with the echoes of love and loss that would never truly disappear.
Corey left the house that night, his heart light, his music alive with newfound purpose. He looked back one last time, knowing he would carry the stories with him. In the quiet town of Broadsfield, a melody born of the past wove itself into the tapestry of the present, a reminder that even in silence, the echoes of our history endure, waiting to be found and played anew. Let's get to another story. The unseen roommate. As the autumn leaves began to carpet the sidewalks of Crestwood University, Maya Thompson found herself standing in front of a nondescript brick building. The faded paint and flickering neon sign advertised affordable living to anxious students who were all too willing to overlook the peeling plaster and occasional waft of something rotten from the alley behind. For Maya, the rent was simply too good to pass up. With her belongings stacked high in the backseat of her ancient hatchback, she opened the heavy wooden door and entered her new apartment on the second floor. The hallway was dimly lit, and the stale scent of carpet cleaner mixed with something earthy hung in the air. She hesitated for a moment but pressed forward, convincing herself it was just the effect of neglect and time. After all, this was her chance at independence. Her roommates, the other students living in the building, had scattered into the distance, each too preoccupied to help her unpack. When she crossed the threshold into her new one-bedroom, the musty smell enveloped her. Cracks spider-webbed across the ceiling, and the walls were discolored, as if they had absorbed a lifetime of secrets. Unpacking was therapeutic and distracting. With lively music playing through her phone, she arranged books, clothes, and knickknacks until the room began to feel like home. Yet, as dusk crept in, a chill pried its way through her rejuvenated space. Each time she turned her back, a slight rustle seemed to follow her, but every time she spun around, she found only shadows. That night, as she nestled into bed, the sounds of the world outside eased her into slumber. But around 2 a.m., a creak awoke her. The sound originated from within the apartment, as if someone had taken a careful step on the old wooden floorboards. Heart thumping like a frightened bird, Maya strained her ears. Another creak followed, accompanied by the faintest whisper, hushed and haunting, like a forgotten memory sweeping through the air. Terrified, Maya clutched her blanket, holding it tight around her shoulders. Maybe it was just the plumbing, she told herself, but as she focused on the dim light of her bedside lamp, a chill coursed through her. This old building could be full of strange noises. Perhaps it was no more than the echoes of past tenants. In the days that followed, things grew stranger. At first, it was just small annoyances. Her favorite mug vanished from the kitchen, replaced by an old, chipped one that had appeared overnight. Her phone charger felt warm to the touch, even when it wasn't plugged in, like it had been used before she arrived. And then there were the notes. Weirdly poetic scribbles left tucked inside her textbooks, surreal phrases about loss and longing that sent chills down her spine. Maya brushed them off, trying to convince herself it was all part of the adjustment period. After all, college was supposed to be an adventure. But one evening, while studying late, a sudden bass noise jolted her from concentration. The bathroom door, which she was sure she closed tightly, now stood ajar. Heart racing, she approached it slowly, each step echoing in the unnatural silence. As she peered inside, the lights flickered, and in that brief moment, she swore she caught sight of something moving. Just beyond the threshold, a fleeting shadow darted towards the far end of the room. The sensation of being watched crawled over her skin, and she retreated, gasping as the door slammed shut behind her with a violent bang. That night, desperate and terrified, she reached out to the building's landlord. The short conversation revealed that she was the only resident on that floor. It should have been empty for years, ever since the last tenant disappeared without a trace. The owner had chalked it up to the gamble of renting in such a cheap place, where college students sometimes vanished into the night, their reasons for leaving lost to the whispers of the building. Maya felt a coldness settle in her bones, a mix of fear and fascination. She decided she would confront whatever was lurking in her apartment. Armed with a flashlight and her phone, she planned a stakeout one night, determined to unveil the mystery. Hours stretched on, shadows danced with the flickering of her flashlight beam, but nothing emerged. Just as she began to question her sanity, she heard the whisper again. A soft, pleading voice that appeared to swirl around her. "Help me." It echoed, as her heart rate soared. Suddenly, everything went still, and out of the corner of her eye, Maya glimpsed a figure, a faint outline shimmering like frost against the wall, revealing an anguished face that seemed to meld with both despair and longing. The figure raised an arm toward her, and she stumbled back, sitting hard on the floor, her breath hitting Ched. It was then she understood. The stories and notes were not just remnants of someone lost. They were fragments of a soul trapped in the very fabric of the building. She felt their torment pour into her, each word a plea for help that pulled at her heartstrings. "Please. Remember me," whispered the apparition before fading away, leaving the air thick with sorrow. With a jolt of understanding, Maya realized she couldn't simply ignore this presence. She would help it find peace. This apartment was not just hers but a haunting ground for another's memories. The following days were filled with research about the apartment's history, piecing together the past like a jigsaw puzzle. The name of the long-lost tenant, their dreams, and an event that led to their untimely departure. As she wrote the final lines of an article about the building's history for her journalism class, Maya hoped to give the spirit a voice. She ensured the memory of the lost soul would not vanish in the corridors of forgotten history but reclaim their identity on paper, a testament to their existence. When the article was published, the haunting whispers subsided, and when night fell, the building felt alive again. The shadows grew less oppressive, illuminating the apartment with a warmth that spoke of liberation. While she sensed a quiet stillness in the air, Maya knew she hadn't been alone in that eerie space. She had shared a bond with something unfathomably deeper, a specter now free, leading her into a future untethered from fear. As the seasons changed and she branched toward the next chapter of her life, she would always carry the memory of that apartment, a mix of terror and solace. A story between worlds, layered with whispers that transcended time. Let's get to another story, the vanishing crypt. It was a crisp autumn morning when the town of Eldridge decided to restore its aging cemetery, a place that had fallen into neglect over the years. The townsfolk gathered, smiles and laughter mingling with the sound of shovels digging into the earth. The idea was to bring back the beauty and history of the cemetery, with its moss-covered headstones and towering oak trees that had stood watch for centuries. As the workers began to clear away the overgrowth and debris, they uncovered something unexpected. A crypt, hidden beneath layers of soil and time. Its stone facade was adorned with intricate carvings, depicting scenes that appeared to twist and writhe under the gaze of the sun. The crew stopped, their excitement palpable. No one in Eldridge had ever heard of this crypt before, despite having lived their entire lives near the cemetery. Oppressive clouds gathered above as the workers gathered around the ornate entrance of the crypt. The leader of the group, Henry, brushed dust away and read aloud the inscription. "Here lies the keeper of secrets, may his slumber be eternal." Ignoring the sense of foreboding that settled over the crowd, they decided to open it. The heavy stone door creaked open, revealing a dark interior that sent chills down their spines. Dust motes danced in the flickering light of their lanterns as they ventured inside, curious and brave. What they found inside was a collection of ancient artifacts, pottery, a rusted sword, and a single, perfectly preserved book bound in leather, its pages yellowed but intact. They took turns examining the items, the air charged with excitement. But as the last loamy light of day faded, a sense of unease crept in. "We should leave this until morning," suggested Evelyn, a historian who had joined the crew. Most agreed, though some, like Thomas, insisted they explore further. The excitement in them overrode the warnings of common sense. The next day, the atmosphere had changed. The air was thick with silence, an unnatural stillness hung over the cemetery. As they approached the crypt, it became clear that some of the workers had vanished overnight. Their tools lay abandoned, and eerie engravings were discovered on the dirt where they had last been seen. "What happened to them?" Emily, another crew member, whispered, looking around nervously. The carvings were indistinct and chaotic, almost as if they had been formed in a panic. Fear gripped them. Hours passed without resolution. They decided to leave the crypt and go back to town, convinced they could alert the authorities. However, as they turned to leave, Emily felt a chilling breeze sweep past her and suddenly, she was gone. Her whitish outline seemed to disintegrate, leaving behind only a fresh carving, a motif of swirling winds. That night, panic set in. The remaining crew members gathered to discuss what had occurred, but they were confronted with something even more sinister. One by one, they began to vanish, leaving behind strange symbols scratched into the ground. Spirals and figures that seemed to dance, reminiscent of shadows battling against the light. Once, there were 10 of them. Now, only Henry and Evelyn remained, their hands trembling but resolute. They refused to leave the cemetery without uncovering the truth behind their companions' disappearances. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, they returned to the crypt, delving further into its depths. As they explored, the atmosphere grew heavier, and the air thickened around them. They discovered that the leather book held accounts of those who had once come to this sacred place, cursed souls who had tried to awaken the keeper from his eternal slumber. Maybe, Henry suggested, clenching the journal tightly, this keeper is not just a figure of ridicule. He's a guardian of something dark. In a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, they understood that the carvings were warnings, echoing the fate of those who had once entered before them. As they flipped through the pages, the muscles in their arms ached, and a temperature drop sent chills down their spines.
Suddenly, there was a booming sound, like a voice resonating from the very walls of the crypt. Leave now or join the tome of the lost. With terror propelling them, they scrambled out of the crypt, but something gripped Henry's foot, pulling him back. In an instant, he was gone, leaving only a series of intricate carvings on the walls outside, depicting the manner of his disappearance.
Evelyn staggered back in disbelief. Alone, she frantically carved her own message into the damp earth, seeking a way to leave the curse behind. The air grew electric, and shadows danced around her as she fled the cemetery, the chaotic carvings whispering her name in a warning lament. Days turned into weeks, and the cemetery restoration was halted indefinitely. Evelyn, the sole survivor, would share the tale of the crypt that had felled her friends, telling anyone who would listen. But the fear of the unknown remained, and every night, she could still hear them calling to her from the crypt, their ghostly whispers drifting through the air, seeking to pull her back into the shadows. And the crypt, now covered once again, lay silent, waiting patiently for the next brave souls to unearth its secrets, carving their fate into the earth below. Let's get to another story. The woods watcher. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink as the Thompson family settled into their campsite deep in the heart of Blackwood Forest. Laughter echoed off the tall pines as 7-year-old Sammy chased fireflies, while his parents, Mark and Anna, whispered sweet nothings over the crackling campfire. Daughters Lily, 10, and Emma, 11, arranged their sleeping bags inside the tent, chatting excitedly about the next day's hiking plans. As twilight settled in, the family gathered around the fire. Mark roasted marshmallows for s'mores while Anna recounted spooky campfire stories that made the girls giggle and gasp. But Sammy was quiet, his eyes wide, darting to the shadows that danced along the tree line. Anna noticed first, brushing it off as the boy's imagination. All the scary stories are just that, Sammy. Just stories, she reassured him, a gentle smile masking her worry. But Sammy only nodded, his gaze fixed on the thicket bordering their campsite. "Mom, can we go home?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Home? But it's just getting fun," Emma chimed, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of adventure, unaware of the growing unease settling over Sammy.
"Why do you want to go home?" Mark inquired, a teasing edge to his tone. "The best part is just beginning. There's someone watching us," Sammy muttered, his face pale in the firelight. Laughter died around the campfire, replaced by an eerie quiet as the three families' smiles faded.
"Who's watching us?" Lily asked, her brow knitted in concern. "Is it a ghost? Or a bear?" "No, it's a man. In the trees," Sammy insisted, pointing towards the darkening border of the woods. "He wears a hat. And he's not nice, Sammy," Anna chuckled, although it came out strained, like she was forcing a laugh past a lump in her throat. "You're just tired, sweetie. Why don't you lie down in the tent?"
"Mom," Sammy started to cry, "I'm not lying. He's there. I can see him." Mark stood up, determined to pacify his youngest. "Let's just take a look, all right? Just see what's out there. Maybe it's just a raccoon or something." The girls exchanged glances filled with concern as the three ventured towards the tree line, Sammy clinging tightly to Mark's hand. Anna stayed behind, her heart racing, anxiety coiling tightly in her stomach.
"See? Nothing to be afraid of," Mark said, scanning the quiet woods. "Just shadows and trees. No one watching us." But Sammy didn't feel reassured. He was right there, Dad. He was hiding behind that big oak. The panic surged in his voice, echoing in the stillness as if something ached to answer. Suddenly, as if summoned by the boy's words, a snapping branch broke the silence. Mark glanced back toward the tent, still flickering softly with the campfire light. He knelt beside Sammy, whose eyes were wide and terrified. Then, as if the darkness itself had come to life, a form slipped between the trees. A figure, tall and obscured, emerged with a slow, unblinking grace. "Sammy, look," Mark pointed, trying to bring his son's focus to the figure, but it melted back into the shadows. Binding dread mixed with adrenaline surged through Mark. "Let's go back," he urged, suddenly wanting nothing more than to be surrounded by the comforting fabric of the tent, where shadows could be banished. They moved quickly back, Sammy at Mark's side, eyes darting fearfully around. Anna waited anxiously, her pulse racing, as they stumbled into the tent, breathless. Mark frantically pulled the zippers to close everything tight, as if pushing the outside world away. "What happened?" Anna demanded, her voice rising with alarm. "There's a man out there," Sammy shouted, voice cracking. The girls whimpered, clutching each other in fearful confusion. Mark shared a strained look with Anna. It wasn't a raccoon after all. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, the night serenading them with whispers of the wind weaving through the branches. The family huddled together in their warmth, but no warmth could shield them from the frigid grip of fear. Hours passed, and the crackling of the fire dwindled outside. Suddenly, they heard the slightest rustle. A careful movement too deliberate to be a mere animal. It stirred something primal in all of them. Sammy, unable to shake off the terror, whimpered as he clung to his mother. "I see him," he said, voice trembling. "He's close." A near silence hung like a cloud. The rustling grew louder, closer, and there came a soft scraping against the tent fabric. The girls gasped, eyes wide with horror. Mark's heart raced as realization dawned. They weren't alone. "Stay close," he warned, protective instincts kicking in as he shifted toward the entrance, shielding the girls. The noise grew. A slow, deliberate stalking, like a predator toying with its prey. "Look," Emma whispered, pointing at the tent flap. A shape loomed, darker than darkness itself. A shadow under the moonlight. Time froze. Sammy, with a soft voice, let out a quivering whimper. "Please go away. I'm scared." That's when the figure revealed itself. A spectral shadow blending with the trees, yet oddly humanoid, standing just outside their world. The children screamed, fear manifesting into raw panic. Mark lunged for the flashlight, hands trembling, illuminating the darkness. But when the beam of light hit the figure, it dissolved into the night, leaving only silvery mist behind. The night dragged on, sleep escaping them in the terror-laden silence. Hours crept by, and dawn brought no comfort. Only the reminder of what lingered close at hand. The family packed quietly, every rustle of their gear carrying the weight of their fright. As they drove away from Blackwood Forest, Sammy watched out of the window, whispering, "He's still there." Behind the trees, Anna hugged him tighter. As they left the woods, the sun broke through the clouds, and for a brief moment, it felt like the night had unlatched its grip on their lives. Yet as they finally emerged from the shadows of the trees, something followed them still, something that bided its time. An unseen watcher, lingering just beyond the veil of safety, nestled within the depths of Blackwood Forest, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to wander too close. Let's get to another story. Echoes of ink under the flickering neon lights of a second-hand bookstore called Time's Echo. Kelly found solace from the cacophony of the busy city streets. It was a curious little shop, filled with the scent of old paper and the comforting silence only books could provide. Kelly, an aspiring writer with dreams larger than her current reality, often haunted these aisles, searching for inspiration among dusty shelves. On a particularly rainy Tuesday, a glint of worn leather caught Kelly's eye. Tucked behind a stack of neglected travel guides was an old manuscript bound in cracked, brown leather. Its title was embossed in faded gold letters, The Whispers of Aeloria. Intrigued, she pulled it out, brushing off layers of dust that seemed to have settled over years. The moment she cracked it open, she was transported into the vivid world of Aeloria, a realm of forgotten magic and ancient curses. The story unfolded around a lonely village beset by shadows, with an unsolved mystery rooted in its past. Kelly's heart raced. It was as if the words were alive. She couldn't put it down, ravenously consuming page after page until the world outside faded into gray. But as she read, strange things began to happen. The next day, while taking her usual route to the cafe,
she noticed a dark figure at the corner. It stood in an alleyway, watching her with a piercing gaze. The figure bore a striking resemblance to the shadowy protagonist of Aloria, whose very purpose was to guard against an emerging darkness. Dismissing it as a coincidence, Kelly hurried past, her heart pounding. The following week, reading late into the night, she reached a chapter about a storm that broke the tranquility of the village. As thunder cracked outside her window, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Glancing around her dimly lit room, she felt the air grow thick, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through her open window, stirring up pages of her own unwritten stories, sending them fluttering like startled birds. "No, this can't be real," she whispered, her voice barely discernible above the storm. Yet the more she read, the more the boundaries between fiction and reality blurred. When she stumbled upon a passage where a character found a cryptic riddle that revealed her deepest fear, Kelly felt the chill of recognition. It was as if the manuscript was reaching across the ages, tapping into her fears of never becoming a successful writer, of being lost in obscurity.
Fueled by both terror and exhilaration, Kelly decided to confront the unfolding reality. Armed with her laptop and an ever thicker notepad, she began to write her own ending to the manuscript, trying to steer the events in a direction she could control. She crafted an arc of courage that saw the villagers unite against the impending darkness, rallying behind a brave heroine modeled after herself. But as she penned her thoughts, the story grew darker. The characters seemed to resist her attempts at steering them toward victory. Instead of rallying, they fell into despair, a surreal reflection of her own self-doubt. Each night, the shadows drawn from the manuscript crept closer to her reality, haunting her dreams, whispering lost tales of the village. Frantic, Kelly returned to the second-hand store, hoping to discover more about the manuscript's origins. She found the shop owner, an elderly woman with a wisdom writ into the lines of her face. "That old thing, it comes from a time when stories influenced the world around them. Be careful, dear, every word you read binds you closer to its fate. But I need to know how it ends," Kelly insisted, desperation motivating her words. The owner fixed her with a steady gaze. "Then you must finish it, not in a way that simply follows its path but in a way that reflects your own truth. Only then will you restore balance." Taking the woman's words to heart, Kelly returned home. She spent sleepless nights crafting an ending that was both a tribute to Aloria and a reflection of her own ideals. A story of hope, unity, and the courage to rise after each fall. On the final night, she wrote the last line, feeling a surge of light course through her as she hit send on her document. She also felt the air around her shift. The shadows that had plagued her for weeks dissipated, replaced by the gentle glow of dawn filtering through her window. In that moment, she realized something extraordinary. She possessed the ability to reshape her own narrative. The darkness had been a catalyst for her growth, pushing her to confront her fears rather than simply be a passive observer of her own life. In the days that followed, the strangeness subsided, but the manuscript stayed with her. Inspired by the journey, she typed up her own version of The Whispers of Aloria, weaving her path into that of the ancient tale. It became a symbol of her rebirth, a story of resilience that she would eventually share with the world. As the seasons changed and she prepared for publication, she smiled at the thought of how the thin line between fiction and reality had shown her the power of her own voice. From the dusty shelves of time's echo, a new story had begun. Let's get to another story. The shifting house. Lila and Tom always dreamt of owning a grand old home, something with character and history that could tell stories. When they come across Ravenswood Manor, an imposing Victorian mansion nestled at the end of a winding, tree-lined road, they feel an almost magnetic pull. The ominous dark wood exterior and intricate spires could have intimidated anyone else, but to them, the allure was irresistible, especially with the price tag that seemed far too low for such a magnificent property. "Maybe we're just lucky," Lila suggested as they scanned the photographs of the dusty old house online. Tom agreed, his heart racing with excitement. They packed their lives away in boxes and set out for the adventure of a lifetime. On moving day, a storm swept through, dark clouds rolling in like an angry tide. The couple felt an uneasy thrill as they crossed the threshold of Ravenswood Manor. The air was heavy with age, filled with ghostly whispers carried on the wind, an invitation or warning. They could not tell. As they roamed through the grand foyer and high-ceilinged parlors, their excitement began to overshadow any sense of foreboding. As night fell, The house transformed. The wind howled through the eaves, and the walls creaked as if the mansion itself was waking from a long slumber. Lila lay in bed, warm and cozy in the master suite. But around midnight, a cold draft fluttered the curtains, pulling her from peaceful dreams. The still air thickened with an electric tension. She leaned over to wake Tom, but he was fast asleep. Deciding not to disturb him, Lila got out of bed to explore the unfamiliar house. The hallway outside their bedroom was dimly lit by the ornate chandelier, but as she stepped forward, she squinted into the shadows. Hadn't she gone left toward the library before? But instead, she found herself facing an entirely different corridor, a narrow passage lined with decaying portraits of long-forgotten residents. As she stepped further into the gloom, the eyes in the paintings seemed to follow her. "Tom," she whispered, the name barely escaping her lips. No answer. Heart thudding in her chest, she turned back to retrace her steps, only to be met with a wall where the entrance to their bedroom once stood. The house had shifted in the night. Panic surged through her as she ran, her breath echoing against the wooden walls. Every door she tried led to more unfamiliar rooms. A parlor adorned with dusty antiques. A kitchen filled with rusted utensils. And finally, a staircase spiraling down into darkness. Climbing down, she exited into a vast, eerie cellar, its walls damp and ominous. Shadows danced along the floor, and the unmistakable scent of decay lingered in the air. Suddenly, a rhythmic thumping echoed through the space, ricocheting against the stone walls. Lila shivered as she followed it, heart racing. She stumbled upon a locked door, partly ajar, revealing a flickering light. Peering inside, her breath caught in her throat. The room was filled with remnants of the house's past, photographs piled haphazardly, menacing litanies scrawled upon the walls, and in the center, a circle of faded flowers around an ancient, shattered mirror. Just then, she heard a voice. It was Tom, desperate and harsh. "Lila, where are you?" "Tom," she cried out, but her voice felt hollow in the dampness. She yanked on the door, but it slammed shut before her. A disembodied laugh echoed through the cellar, and the shadows began to twist with life, swirling around her, pulling at her ankles. With sheer panic coursing through her veins, she fought against the pull of the darkness, making her way back up the stairs, through doorways that had shifted closed, only to find that the mansion was a maze, built of secrets and sorrow. Finally, she spotted a faint glow at the end of a corridor. Tom's voice getting louder and filled with dread. "Lila, you can't be in here. I'm trying to find you," she shouted. She dashed toward the light, racing through the shifting hallways that felt alive, walls closing in on her, forcing her back. In the chaos of the night, the mansion revealed its dreadful truth. Time bends and walls whisper of those who came before. Those who never left. The house fed on fear, changing its layout with a mind of its own, trapping them within until it grew tired. Lila felt the sting of despair creeping in. The whispers of the house surrounded her, weaving tales of loss, betrayal, and unfulfilled lives. Tom's voice echoed again, "Lila, please." Desperation rattled in her chest as she desperately reached for the final door at the end of the corridor, the sanctuary she believed she had seen at the beginning. With a sudden rush, the door opened to an ethereal light. This time, she did not hesitate. She leapt through, pulling herself into the safety of the unknown. Silence fell. The air was still. She opened her eyes to find herself standing in front of an unblemished version of Ravenswood Manor, the storm clearing to reveal a star-studded sky. But where was Tom? She spun around, feeling the tremors of dread clawing at her sanity. The laughter of the mansion echoed in her mind, a memory of something deeper and darker buried within the walls. As she took a step back, the vast expanse of the mansion began to shimmer and fade, replaced by the raven shadows dancing in the trees. The manor had devoured its new occupants, feeding on their curiosity while cloaking them in its timeless secrets. Lila fell to her knees, heartbroken and haunted, knowing deep down that with the dawn, Ravenswood would stand silent yet again, waiting for the next unsuspecting couple to walk through its doors. Let's get to another story: The Forgotten Friend. Ethan Reynolds had never intended to return to Oak Hollow. After years of carving out a life in the city, he ended up back in the place where he grew up, drawn by an inherited house and a longing for the familiar. The old Victorian stood at the end of Maple Street, its once vibrant paint now peeling and the windows clouded by years of neglect. Despite the weight of nostalgia that filled his heart, he struggled to fit back into a town that felt both alien and achingly familiar. As he settled in, Ethan's mind frequently wandered back to his childhood, a time carried by careless laughter and endless adventures. He spent hours rummaging through old boxes, revealing relics of the past: baseball cards, worn-out toys, and faded photographs. Among them, one name sparked deep-rooted memories: Finn. Finn had been Ethan's closest friend, a wild spirit of a boy who had made the ordinary world feel extraordinary. But the more he thought about Finn, the more others dismissed his existence. "I don't remember a Finn," Ethan, his childhood neighbor, Mrs. Harper, said with a bemused smile. "Are you sure you're not mixing him up with someone else?" At the grocery store, Ethan mentioned Finn to Josh, his former teammate, who tilted his head in confusion. "No Finn here, man. Might be time to let those memories go." Disbelief spread like a shadow over Ethan's heart. Had he imagined Finn all along? In the hush of night, when the house creaked and whispered, he grappled with the uncertainty. Yet one thing was clear: he could still see Finn. There he was in the evenings, leaning against the worn birch tree outside the house about to fall asleep, a sly grin plastered across his face. The laughter that had once been a source of joy now felt ominous, echoing through Ethan's mind like a ghostly warning. Days turned into weeks as Finn became more prominent, appearing in mundane moments, casually slipping back into Ethan's life. They would talk about old times, like the summer they built a fort in the woods or the night they gave chase to fireflies under a full moon. Yet beneath the surface of their companionship lay a darker undertone. Finn's laughter sometimes turned unsettling, morphing into a smirk that twisted his youthful visage into something unrecognizable. Then came the moments when Finn's memories turned to taunts. "You left us behind, Ethan," he would whisper harshly under their tree. "You abandoned Oak Hollow. You abandoned me." The accusations gnawed at Ethan's heart like a gnashing pain. One night, as rain drummed against the roof and shadows danced across the walls, Ethan confronted Finn. "You're not real," he shouted, rage flooding his voice. "You can't be." Finn's grin faded, and for the first time, Ethan saw the flicker of anger beneath his friend's facade. "I am as real as your denial. You can't outrun me. You built this town in your memory, but I am here to remind you of what you left behind." Fear trembled through Ethan's body. He turned to flee, but the door slammed shut, trapped in a world tangled with memories, regrets, and a creeping dread of the darkness Finn embodied. It was then that Ethan realized the truth: Finn was more than a figment. He was a manifestation of every moment Ethan had buried, every scar he'd ignored in his flight from home. As he sat trembling in the parlor, shadows growing darker by the second, he whispered, "Why are you doing this?" "Because you need to remember," Finn replied, his eyes glowing with an intense light. "There's no escaping the past. You've brought your light back to Oak Hollow, but your darkness festers." At dawn, Ethan's turmoil fell silent in the cold gray light of early morning. He made his way to the town square where the old well sat, the place where he and Finn once shared their secrets. He drew a breath heavy with the taste of moisture and regret, then peered into the well's depths, the pitch blackness reflecting his fears. "I'm sorry," he called into the void. "I'm sorry for leaving. I should have never forgotten you. I should have never forgotten us." Silence reigned, heavy as the fog that wrapped Oak Hollow in its grasp. Finally, a flicker caught his eye, a dim light emerging from the depths. Ethan looked down, realizing it was the shimmer of memories long buried. He grasped for both the light and the darkness, seeking balance and acceptance. As he turned back toward town, the weight on his chest felt lighter. The shadows of his past still loomed, but instead of consuming him, they whispered secrets of forgiveness and healing. Finn was gone, vanished like mist under the sun, but the boy he used to be began to resurface instead. Ethan felt a warmth in his heart, a reminder that his childhood, with all its imperfections, was still a part of him. He no longer feared the memories or the tight grip of Oak Hollow. Confronting the past allowed him to embrace a future untethered from the lies he carried. As he walked forward, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the path ahead, where both shadows and light could coexist, a tapestry woven by the hands of time. Let's get to another story. The clock strikes twice. Elliot Windsor was known throughout the quaint town of Haverhill as a connoisseur of antiquities, particularly grand and ornate clocks. Each piece in his collection whispered tales from another time, but none spoke to him quite like the grandfather clock he stumbled upon at an estate sale. The house, weathered and heavy with unspoken memories, creaked with anticipation as he entered. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that filtered through grime-coated windows, revealing remnants of a life once lived. Among mismatched furniture and faded portraits, an ebony grandfather clock stood sentinel in the corner of the dimly lit room. Its intricate carvings twisted around floral motifs that hinted at an elaborate artistry long forgotten. The owner, an elderly woman with frail hands and kindly eyes, seemed simultaneously fearful and reverent as Elliot approached. "Be careful with that one," she cautioned, a slight tremor in her voice. "It doesn't keep time like the others. It changes things." Elliot waved her off, charmed by the clock's beauty. How could something so exquisite be anything but a treasure? He made his purchase against a backdrop of the woman's nervous gaze, seemingly aware of secrets buried deep within the wood. That night, as the clock struck midnight for the first time, he marveled at the clarity of the chime. A resonance that filled his home and left him enraptured. Moments later, however, the clock chimed again, its second stroke hanging ominously in the air. A chill swept through the room, though Elliot brushed it aside as a trick of the mind. As days passed, Elliot learned to appreciate the clock's peculiar cadence. Yet, unease steadily crept into his life. He began to notice the subtle changes that unfurled around him. His living room rearranged itself while he slept. A door appeared where none had been, and every time the clock told those twin midnights, he felt the world around him quiver. His friends, once vibrant fixtures of his life, began to behave oddly. Sarah, his longtime neighbor, forgot their shared morning coffee routine, acting as though they'd only just met. Then, Mark, his golf buddy, faded slowly from memory, as if their past rounds together had never transpired. Weeks passed submerged in an ever-thickening fog of confusion, but Elliot's obsession with the clock deepened. He studied the engravings, hoping to uncover its secrets. As he swept the dust from its base one evening, he caught a glimpse of symbols etched into the wood, runes that glimmered when exposed to light. Fascinated yet fearful, he researched their origins, eventually discovering they belonged to an ancient order believed to manipulate time. His heart raced as comprehension dawned. This clock did not merely tell time, it regressed it, devouring moments until it erased his entire existence. When, perched upon the verge of panic, he graduated from disbelief to horror, he realized he must confront the clock before he too was swallowed by its inexorable hunger. The next midnight, he braced himself as the clock chimed its two ghastly tones. The world warped around him. A dark whirl, flickering shadows, and a sudden, suffocating silence. He surged forward into the room and grabbed the pendulum, its weight heavy with time's relentless march. "No," he shouted into the void, a desperate plea against the merciless machinery of the clock. In that instance, the 12th chime echoed in disjointed waves, and he felt a pull, a surge toward the depths of time itself. Surrounding him, memories flickered like dying candles. Sarah's laughter echoing down the hall. Mark's clapping back at a well-timed joke. The warmth of friendships that provided shelter against the world outside. He could feel them slipping away, and horror gripped his heart. This was a battle for his existence. Using every ounce of his will, he twisted the pendulum backward, forcing time to relent. With a final surge, he unleashed a cry to the universe. A declaration of his refusal to be erased. A pulse resonated through the clock, breaking the grip of the runes, as they dimmed and dissolved. The air fell still, his reality solidified, and as the 12th bell faded into silence, the haunting grip of the clock loosened, vanishing like mist in the morning sun. Exhausted, Elliot stood alone in his living room, the clock now silent in its corner, serene and unthreatening. He felt a churn of grief, bittersweet yet consumable. While he had saved himself, he mourned the mundane moments he had taken for granted, now vivid and irreplaceable. He decided then to strip the clock of its dark shimmer and replace it with memories anew. No matter how beautiful the past might be, the only thing worth holding was the present, the time that still ticked softly in his heart. From that day forward, Elliot Windsor became a different kind of clock collector. One proud of the living moments he could embrace, untroubled by the weight of time or its twisting shadows. Thank you for watching and subscribe for more horror stories.